So this is the reading group video for Power of Us. Just very quickly, this is designed so that after you've read Power of Us, you can have a reading group experience with this video. I'm going to go through the reading group questions from the back of the book and answer them myself, and then you can write your answers in the comments if you like, or whatever. So there's potential for interactivity in the comments. So if you've not read the book, do not watch this video for two reasons, unless for some bizarre reason you want to. Firstly, it's going to ruin the book, completely ruin the book. It will completely wreck the experience of reading the book, unless you have some really weird way of reading books. But basically, you're going to find out everything that happens. It's going to reveal loads of secrets and reveals from the book. And the second thing is, if you haven't read the book, this video is going to be isn't going to make any sense at all. so anyway, if you haven't read the book, don't watch this video. Right, let's get on with it. I'm just going to go through, read each question. I'm going to read each question out loud, then I'm going to give some of my thoughts. I did a little test run of this video. This video could last hours. I've got so much to say about it, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try and be really brief. Let's go for it. Question 1. From the reading group list of reading group questions in the back of the book. This book was written in third-person objective point of view, meaning you do not get to hear what the characters are thinking. How did you find this? Many people say they enjoy trying to guess what the characters are thinking. Did you? When do you think one or more of the characters might have been having strong emotional reactions to what was happening? Boom. By the way, I'm not actually going to always answer the question. I might just talk about it and maybe just mention why I put the question in the reading list. I think it's for an actual reader that didn't write the book that is the exact target audience of these questions. So I can't always answer them because I'm the author. But here's the thing. I've put this in as the first question. I like third-person objective point of view story writing, and I love reading books that are written like this. So you have no idea what the characters are thinking, because I think it's fun. You can try and guess what they're thinking. It's a little bit cinematic, because obviously in most films or TV series you don't. There are exceptions. In general, you don't get to find out what the characters are thinking. You have to guess. And I quite like that experience. I don't like all the books I read to be like that, but I think it's nice to have variety in the books you read. Anyway, so that's one of the reasons I did it, because I feel like it's an underrepresented style of writing, and it's good to have more books written like this. Yeah, that's it really. Boom. So there you go. I wonder what you, the reader, thought of it, and how the reading experience was for you given it's written like that. Next one. Do you think Cheryl knew that Dean was coming the first week? If so, how might she have known? Would you turn up unannounced at a social club or make inquiries in advance? I dropped this in because I think it's an interesting one. I had a few kind of beta readers for this book. I don't always use beta readers, but I did for this one, for various reasons which I might mention later. But there were some comments saying, oh, it's a bit odd he could just turn up and be accepted so quickly. And here's the thing. Not everything in a book is explained. At some point you have to start the story. I think it's quite likely that he checked in advance with Cheryl and said, oh, when is it? Blah, blah, blah. When should I come? And then you might go, oh, well, how come she didn't know his name? Well, she didn't necessarily know what he looked like. So, yeah, so there's that, which I think is quite interesting, because then that slightly changes the dynamic of the book. But not by, I don't think it changes it by much. I don't think it's so important it needed mentioning. But anyway, I don't know. I just think it's an interesting perspective. And personally, here's the thing. I don't think myself, I often wouldn't check in advance and I'd just randomly turn up. And my experience of going to social clubs, especially slightly more unusual ones like this, because I think we can say this is a more unusual, rarer type of social group. My experience is that I am welcomed and that we are welcoming of other people. And so I think it's quite realistic how this book shows the experience of Dean initially getting to know people. Boom. Let's do the next question. Do you think Emily's mum actually dropped her off by the door? How do you feel about Emily's independence? Why do you think she likes to go to Power of Us? Emily is clearly very into nature. Would you agree that most children have a hobby about which they know more than is usual for their age? I'm probably going to say to all of these, I think this is an interesting question. Well, of course I am, because I wrote it. And so I was picking out things that were, to me, interesting. But here's the thing. Do you think Emily's written well as a character? I think she is, because, for example, I worked for a long time as a maths tutor, including spending time with children of approximately Emily's age. So I don't know. I mean, let's be honest. Most of us have experience of spending time with younger people. Anyway, but my experience of spending time with younger people is they usually have something that they're an expert about. Something like one of my classic examples is technology. I find that younger people are always just completely on the ball with where technology is at the moment. I have experience of, for example, in my maths tutoring, saying to one of my students, "Oh, you know you can do blah 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 if you look it up on YouTube." And they look at me as if I'm an alien. They're like, "Of course I can. Why would you even mention that?" it's like saying you can cross the road to get to the other side to them. Anyway, but my point is, and I try to reflect that in that little moment where Dean is confused about how to send the photographs to Emily, and Emily's like, "But what are you talking about? It's like you're speaking. It's like Dean is speaking a foreign language at that point." Emily's like, "But why are you confused? Technology is easy. You don't need to check with me." But anyway, blah blah blah. And anyway, I think I was heavy-handed enough that I don't really need to talk about this, and it was hopefully obvious. But obviously there are some issues at home with Emily, and I think she hints at that quite heavily. The story hints at it quite heavily, and so maybe that's why she's at Power of Us, because in a way she's looking for familial groups. And to answer the original question, my intention as the writer, not that this has to be what happened in your head, that a story can mean different things, but my intention was to mean that Emily wasn't dropped off by her mum, and she said that basically to give the impression she'd been dropped off by her mum, because she kind of knew she'd get in trouble otherwise. But I don't think she was dropped off by her mum. That wasn't the intention. But who knows? Depends on how you read it. Let's do the next one. Did you like Cheryl's stories? Which was your favourite? Did you see any parallels between her stories and what was happening in the main story? Is it possible that Cheryl purposefully chose the stories each week to help the others in the problems they were facing at the time? How might the book have felt different to read if these stories hadn't been included? So, why did I include Cheryl's stories? This is very interesting because this is my first fiction book, so I can imagine some people thinking, oh, I wonder if he's going to do this in every book he writes. And the answer is no. I think it's entirely possible I'll never ever do this again. It felt like the right thing to do for this story. The reason was, and I'm going to talk about this later, it was important to me that each of the 6 main characters played a role, and that it was kind of like a house of cards. And if you know a house of cards is lots of playing cards stacked on top of each other, and if you remove any single card, the whole thing falls down. That's kind of what it means. Obviously, you could make a stack of cards where you pull one out and it doesn't all fall down. But anyway, my understanding is that's what that saying means. So the idea was it was a house of cards of 6 people, and if you removed any of the 6, the attempt to save Store Park and the community centre would fail, because I wanted them all to be important. I wanted them all to be very important. I didn't want any of them to just have a token role. Blah blah blah. My point is, Cheryl. The idea behind Cheryl was that she was just a guiding hand, and I wanted the way that she guided to be extremely subtle. And I realised that if she used the stories as a way to guide the group, that would be very subtle. So that's why I did it. And obviously when you're writing a story, things take on a life of their own. I'm trying to get into the head of the character, so it's not... I mean, I'm not going to say, but maybe not all her stories actually serve that purpose in the end. Maybe she told at least one of the stories just because she liked it. Anyway, whatever. And then I say, how do I think the story would have read differently if the short stories hadn't been there that she'd read? I think it would have been a very different story, actually. I think I would have had to write Cheryl's character very differently. At least that's my feeling. So that's what that's about. Let's do the next one. Do you think that in some cases it is acceptable to build new houses on parkland? In many local communities in England, young people are forced to move away because they cannot afford to buy or rent. Do you think this is a good reason to relax building restrictions? What other problems might a lack of housing cause? Do you think it is better to build more houses in the centre of a town, reducing the amount of green space within the town, or to build on the edge of a town, making the town spread further into the countryside? Can you think of other things that could be done to improve access to green spaces for people in towns and cities? Is access to green spaces and wildlife actually important? What is a good balance between caring about wildlife in cities and wildlife in the countryside? I put this in because part of my inspiration for this story was this dilemma. And I don't want to answer this because I kind of feel like my answer to this question is hidden within the story, so I'm not really going to answer it. But I do want to just share one thing, which is what a key thing which I've been into wildlife and nature for a long time, including doing conservation work and stuff like that, nature conservation work. And something I discovered when I was reading about it or learning about it, I can't really remember now, was that there is this principle in nature conservation, which is that there are actually... Do you remember when Dean said, oh, it's not really a competition, it's a sliding scale. So I'm about to simplify something as if it were a competition between two options, whereas obviously in reality it's a sliding scale and you can do other things as well. But anyway, you can describe nature conservation as being a balancing act, being a choice. Either you try to conserve nature everywhere, so you have little nature reserves scattered everywhere, or you say, forget it, this is a lost cause, this isn't going to work. Instead, focus all the effort on, for example, I mean, this is massively simplifying, there's lots of problems, but anyway, just buying up loads of land, farms, etc. in one massive swathe of the British countryside, just talking about Britain as an example, and then just turning that to nature. So some people say it would be better just to focus all the attention on just one area, and then it's this idea, and to develop that idea further, there is this argument that you should encourage everyone to move to cities, just turn cities into just grey environments full of buildings, so that you're then reducing the impact that humans have on the rest of the planet. I think there's some really clear upsides and some very clear downsides to what I'm talking about there, and I don't really have an opinion on it. I just think it's very complicated. But it's an interesting idea. I think it's an interesting idea because it can seem obvious that, oh, a parkland in a city, or a big town, because Bournemouth is actually just a very big town. Surely it's obvious that that's a good thing. Well, it can be argued that it isn't. Let's do the next one. Storr is a fictitious suburb of Bournemouth. Does it remind you of anywhere you know? If you happen to know Bournemouth, can you guess which suburb I mainly, although only very loosely, based Storr on? Well, the answer is Kinston. I loosely based it on Kinston. If you've been to Kinston Community Centre, I think you might get the sense that, oh yeah, Storr Community Centre, there's some strong aspects in which it resembles Kinston Community Centre. Because, I mean, pretty much everything I write is based on something I've experienced, because I just find it much easier. And I've experienced so many things, as everyone has, that you can quite easily pick something that fits what you need. It just makes it easier. Yeah, I'm just like, why make something up when you can just, well, anyway. So yeah, that's the answer to that one. By the way, Stoor, that is an old name for the Stour. And I thought it would be nice if a part of Bournemouth had retained that older name. So, by the way, that's where the name Storr came from. Okay, let's do the next one. Do you have a local community centre? If so, do you visit it? Do you think anything else is now replacing the role community centres used to have in many people's lives? Are there things that community centres offer that are difficult to replace? I have a really strong opinion about this, which might be obvious from the book. I think community centres are very important. So I'm just going to share my opinion here. And obviously, I'm sharing a summarised version of my opinion. So this is like the headlines, and I know that it's a very complicated situation, but broad brush. I think what is replacing community centres is things like Meetup, the application platform where you can join and then go to meetups, or like Facebook. I don't really know. I think there's like Facebook community groups where they organise activities, that kind of thing. And I can see strong arguments for how that replaces the role of community centre and enables lonely people, for example, just one functionality, to meet other people. But here's my issue with it. Ultimately, it's controlled by a corporation trying to make money, whereas a community centre is grounded in the local community, in that local space. It's a real physical thing that enables local people to find each other. And I struggle to see how anything else really replaces that. And I think our communities, if we lose things like this, suffer. Broadly speaking, that's my opinion. Okay, let's do the next one. Could Morgan really have known that Steve was alright so quickly after being hit on the head? Could Morgan have had an ulterior motive in saying Steve's injury was not serious? Do you think Dean wanted to fight? Why do you think Dean hit Steve like that? How do you think Dean felt afterwards? Might someone have encouraged Steve to cause trouble that night in order to achieve something to do with the planning permission? It was very important to me to put this question in the reading group sort of chapter at the end. Because, let's be clear, I'm not a medical doctor, but I am certain that you cannot know Steve was alright at that point. He's been hit on the head, he's fallen unconscious. So, why would Morgan have said that? Well, she wants them to be in a good mood so she can get a story for the newspaper. And I'm not saying all news reporters are like that, but Morgan, the character in our story, was like that. So I'm just going to quickly address all of these. I put all of these in for a good reason. What I thought was a good reason. Do you think Steve wanted to fight? My answer to that is, again, how you read the story is up to you. But my intention as the writer was to communicate the idea he didn't really want to fight. But at the same time, I tried to make it slightly grey because, he did move forwards towards Steve very early on in the encounter. Maybe if he hadn't done that, things would have panned out better and the fight wouldn't have happened. And you could say that he did other subtle things which actually aggravated the situation. I don't know. It was intentionally slightly grey. Why do you think Dean hit Steve like that? Well, my answer to that, and my intention as the writer, was just that Dean was trying to avoid fighting, but ultimately his training kicked in. And it was a split-second decision which I imagine he regretted afterwards. At least this was kind of my picture as I was writing it. And his training enabled him to strike Steve very hard and fast and knock him out. But anyway, so I think that's why he did it. I think it was an instinctive thing, and I don't think he wanted to do it. So I've addressed how he felt afterwards. This is an interesting one. Here's the funny thing. I don't know how much people think about books when they read them. I think about books a lot. I'm always thinking, oh, I wonder why they did that. I wonder why that happened. So here's the thing. In my so when I plan the story, there's things happening behind the scenes which don't get mentioned, which are important. To me, it's important that I picture them because it helps the story kind of flow better and make sense overall, and it gives things for the reader to work out. It's a remarkable coincidence, isn't it, that Steve appeared in the community centre and caused a fight just as the planning permission was happening, enabling the community centre to get shut down on a pretense, making it easier to get funding for a new one. Well, maybe someone gave him some cash to do it, and that was my idea. But I thought it was better not to then mention it in the story and just leave it as something for someone to work out if they wanted to. Next one. Do you have an image of what Tickles 3 looks like? Which character or characters do you have the clearest mental picture of? Or do you not really have mental pictures of any of the characters? Which of the characters seem to you to be the main characters in the story? I'll just very quickly answer this. I love this question because my experience is that some people have like this really clear picture. They can describe exactly what someone looks like. Other people like me, I have no idea what characters look like in books. Even if the writer goes to great effort, you know that some writers give this long description, which I'm fine with. I enjoy reading it at the time. I can't remember afterwards. I just remember their name. So me, I have literally no idea what any of the characters look like. I'm somehow visualizing what's happening without actually assigning any kind of visual look to any of the characters. And because it's a mental image, I can't describe it in words, but basically, yeah. I wonder how many other people. I've found that this is quite rare, and most people seem to have an idea of, at least a rough idea of what the characters look like. Anyway, I'd be really interested to know what which characters people think are the main characters. I've got two opinions on this, which I know sounds weird because surely I would only have one opinion. My original intention was for Dean not to be the main character of the story. I think it's obvious it's surely obvious he's the point of view character because he's in every scene, and when he leaves the scene, the chapter ends. That's it. We never see anything happen where he isn't involved. And I know there's a couple of scenes where we kind of see what's happening away from him, but my idea is he's quite observant, so he knows what's happening even though he's not watching or whatever. So does that make him the main character? Do you know what? To me, the main character in the story is Emily. I feel like she actually has the most agency. She is driving the plot forward the hardest. And I feel like she's actually one of the greatest motivators out of the group in terms of making other people do things. And I kind of feel like, I don't know. Yeah. There you go. That's my answer. But here's the thing. I just want to say one more thing on this. And this is very important to me as a writer. If a character is in a book for more than like one scene, even if the character is in the book in the background for more than in other scenes, this still counts. I then think about that character and I try and make the experience, what that character does, make sense all the way through the book. Because I know that some readers, for some reason, will hook on to different characters. And they could hook on to any character. And I know that I've read books where, so my experience as a reader is I've read a book where I've hooked onto one of the sub-characters, whatever, minor characters, and I've gone, oh, I like this one. Oh, I'm excited to find out what this minor character does for the rest of the book. I know they're not the main character, but it'll be a fun thing for me in the book. And then I discover that the author's just kind of using this person as a placeholder just to kind of make things happen or whatever, hasn't really thought the character through. And this minor character ends up doing weird stuff that doesn't really make sense. And I find that very frustrating as a reader. So it's very important to me that all 6 of the main characters, because let's be honest, there are obviously 6 principal characters, the people that go to Powerverse. I tried very hard to make each of those characters be consistent all the way through the book, have clear motivations, do things that made sense, know things in the moment in the story that made sense as to what they would know personally in terms of what other people had told them. And so I think there were a couple of things where I can imagine possibly an editor might have said to me, do we need that character to ask the question because the reader already knows? And to me it's like, no, because we need it to be authentic, and that character would clearly ask because they wouldn't know yet. Anyway, blah blah blah. And obviously it's not just those 6 characters, other characters I tried to make sense as well. Let's crack on. Do you think so many cats could live in one house together? Do you imagine other cats might try to sneak in and steal food? Do you like cats? Do you feel the same as Florrie about rescue cats? Do you feel the same as Emily regarding the impact of cats on the natural environment? I've just kind of put that in because I think they're interesting questions. I honestly don't think that many cats could live in one house together. I've got quite a lot of experience of cats from my house. I've done quite a lot of house sitting, so I've often had cats, sometimes multiple cats. I cannot imagine that many cats living in a house together. I might be wrong, maybe it's possible. But so here's the thing. It's a little bit unrealistic, maybe. So why did I put it in? I don't know. I just thought it was fun, and it also made the cat dating thing work later. So it's a story. Yeah, there you go. That'll do. Let's do the next one. Do you think the fundraising in this book was realistic? In modern day England, would you agree that fundraising is a mixture of finding grants, getting large donations, and the aggregate power of lots of smaller donations? Is every donation equally important? Are there additional benefits, beyond the money raised, to fundraising for a good cause? Can I answer this backwards? I think there are additional benefits to fundraising, and my understanding is, because obviously I've done quite a bit of conservation stuff, and so I've got quite a lot of experience of being in charities and sometimes being at least tangentially involved in fundraising. Sometimes I get the impression that fundraising doesn't even have to make much of a profit, and it can just be used for publicity. And this is rare, and I'm not saying all fundraising like this, but it can be. And that raising of the profile raises issues and in the long term generates more money, but doesn't necessarily generate the money in the moment. And I do have some experience of fundraising, and I tried to reflect what my personal experience or knowledge of the sector is, which is that in fact my understanding is you do generally have to get grants for bigger projects, and there's no real way around it. They expect you to do some fundraising as I don't know, it's just a fashion, blah blah blah, whatever. So yeah, that's my experience. And my experience also is that you are reliant on getting some larger donations, and without those you can struggle. So yeah. Anyway, yeah. So I intended the fundraising to be quite realistic, actually. Do you enjoy seeing wildlife and nature? I think the amount of wildlife Dean and Emily saw on each trip to the park was realistic for a 5 or 6 hour visit. Do you agree? I chose to compress the sightings they made into a shorter period of time, skipping the gaps that might happen between seeing different things, to make the book more interesting to read. Do you think this was a good decision? What do you like to see most? Mammals, birds, butterflies, flowers, or... Love to hear your answers to this. My answer is obviously that I do enjoy seeing wildlife and nature. I've spent a lot of my life doing this, and I tried to make all of the nature stuff in the story realistic, which I could generally do from my own knowledge without having to check things and look them up. Yeah, and in reality, if I'd been describing Dean and Emily walking through the forest doing a nature survey, the scene would have gone, oh, can you see anything? No. Oh, is that something over there? No. Oh, something just flew. No, didn't see it. Oh, how was last week? Oh, it's good anyway. Oh, is that? Shh. Is that? No, it's not. Let's walk quietly. And then they'd be walking in silence for 5 minutes and they wouldn't see anything. And then they'd finally see something. Because especially wildlife watching in a woodland, you're not seeing stuff all. It's not like wildlife watching on a pond, which is why I think wetland nature reserves are so fantastic for people that are not completely addicted to nature watching. There's always colourful thing to see out on the water. It's my recommended way into wildlife watching. I think it's the easiest and most rewarding. Anyway, my point is, I did make it. I just thought, what do I do? Do I do this realistically? Nah, let's just have them see some stuff. I just think it makes it more fun. And it's not totally unrealistic, because if I'm bird watching in a woodland, it's entirely possible for me to see a goldfinch, what was it? Goldcrest, and then immediately see a great spotted woodpecker, and then immediately see a wood mouse, which didn't actually happen in the story, but it could have done. So actually it's not that unusual, but then sometimes you go 5 minutes without seeing anything, and then you see a few things at once. So yeah, there you go. But stories aren't always realistic. I got so many things I want to say on that, but I'm going to move on. Do you think Dean and Florrie might have met anyway without Power of Us? How might Dean and Florrie have met if they had not met at Power of Us? might anyone else have met as well? For example, Florrie and Abdul, or Emily and Dean, or Kyle and Dean. Do you think particular types of people are more reliant on community activities in order to make friends? Do you know what? I'm not sure what my answers are to this, but I think they're very interesting questions to answer, which is why I put them in. So be interested to hear what my readers think of it. Oh, jeez. Do I think... Okay, let's just look at the big one. Do you know what? I think... Okay, here's the thing. Because I thought Emily was such an interesting character, I'm interested to think, would Emily and Dean have met? I'm not sure they would have done. Except, you see... I mean, would they have met that day in the park where he was sleeping? Possibly. But would Emily have kept out of his way? Probably. My theory on Emily is she's got a lot of street smarts. She has to, because she seemingly isn't being looked after very well by her mum. Which one of my beta readers seemed a bit puzzled by that. And I'm like, hello, you know, some children are not brought up in very good families and are not looked after very well. This is not news. And those kind of people are drawn to community centres which offer support networks. So she is the kind of child that might turn up on her own to a community centre. Therefore, I felt it was very realistic. Anyway, my point is, she must have street smarts. I don't think there's any way she'd be going anywhere near Dean in his rucksack, in his sleeping bag. She's pretty good at looking for things in the woods. I'm sure she would have seen him from a distance and kept out of his way. So yeah, so that's an interesting one. And to me, their friendship was really important in the story. Are particular types of people more reliant on community activities in order to make friends? I think they are. I referred to my earlier comment about things like Meetup. I think for people that are socially... Do you know what? I'm going to say, I don't know, it's complicated, but at a guess, community activities are important. And whether they are more or less important, I think they're really good. So I support them. There you go. That's my answer. Would you like to go on a motorhome holiday? Where do you imagine Dean and Florrie might visit? Where would you want to visit in a motorhome? My answer to this is I owned a motorhome for years and went away around Europe a lot on long trips. Because I've been self-employed for years, so I'm able to choose to take long holidays. Yeah. So, would I? Yes, I've previously gone. Anyway. So here's my thing. I have this picture. I don't really know where Dean would go. Do you know? You know how sometimes you don't really have a picture of the character in that scenario? I don't know. I think I'd be surprised. As in, I just don't know. I think Florrie would find an article from a magazine or something which would say the 10 best places to visit in France, and she'd cut it out or she'd photocopy it, and I think she'd say, oh Dean, should we visit these 10 places? And I think some would say that's not very imaginative, and I would say I think that actually sounds like a very good idea, because it would force you to go to 10 places, you discover other places on the way, and I think it's good to have a little bit of arbitrary structure just to stop you from just meandering. I don't know. There you go, that's my answer. Do you think it is inspirational to have all the main protagonists being positive and non-judgmental to those around them? This is clearly not a realistic reflection of the human race as a whole. Do you think there are risks in being this trusting in real life? It seems inarguable that nearly every book ever published is in some way unrealistic, perhaps including ridiculous coincidences, dragons, magic, super spies, and so on. Can you think of any books that are completely realistic? What other unrealistic aspects of stories can you think of? Do you agree that many non-fiction books are also unrealistic, if only because they can choose to focus on certain things at the exclusion of others, thereby making them misleading by omission? This is important to me. I don't think the interesting thing for me at this point is to answer the question, but I put this question in to highlight that partly as a nod to the reader, because I think some readers might go, oh, the main character is a little bit positive, how realistic is that? So I just wanted to acknowledge, I know I did it on purpose. um, here's the thing. Let's use James Bond as an example. James Bond, who I am not a big fan of because I think he uses conflict resolution through violence far too much. Anyway, that's for another time. He is seemingly good at everything. Well, that's not very realistic, is it? Surely he should be like really bad at some things and make really dumb mistakes sometimes and encounter people who speak, I don't know, Algerian, and he doesn't speak Algerian and all that kind of stuff. That never happens, does it? Well, anyway, just in general it doesn't. Is this a problem? I don't think it is. We like inspirational characters that are really good at things. So here's the thing. I aspire to be positive and non-judgmental about others. I would love to live in a world where everyone was positive and non-judgmental and welcoming. And so, seems like a good thing to write a story with. People are like that. I don't see a problem with it. Okay, next one. I chose to make the writing more stilted during periods where Dean was alone or struggling with something. Did you notice this? I think this reflects a key aspect of the story, namely that community centres can help those who feel lonely, perhaps due to social awkwardness. I wanted the book to carry a sense of that awkwardness. Do you think this was a good choice? Could I have done it another way? Bearing in mind that the writing style of the book does not include the inner voices of the characters. To me, this is another example of where I don't think I can answer the question because I think I've kind of already answered it because I've already written the book. So you can see what my style choices were. So, do you know what? I think I'm allowed to say to one of the questions I don't want to answer it. Yeah, there you go. Do I think it was a good choice? I obviously do because I did it. Could I have done it another way? I didn't even really think about doing it another way. It just felt because of the issue of the writing style I chose. Yeah, there we go. Next question. Last one, in fact. Do you think Dean started to understand Florrie better as the story progressed? Do you think there was anything in particular that Florrie was trying to communicate to Dean that he did not realise? Perhaps he did realise, but simply didn't want to act on it. Did you notice that Dean said 7 o'clock to Florrie as the time to leave for store munchies? But he had moments earlier agreed 7:30 with Maria. Could this have been a mistake, or might he have done it on purpose? This is another question, and I've said this about a few of them, where I'm not sure it's designed for me to answer. Because I wrote the book, and so I've already revealed my hand, because I've already revealed the extent to which I wanted Dean to understand. And by the way, it wasn't intended to be a mistake. Florrie has a track record for being late, and so that's why he did it. He judged that saying 7 o'clock would then enable them to get there for about 7:30. So that's why he did it. It was partly to show how he's getting used to the people and how he's starting to work with them better. I thought it was a nice thing to do. Yeah, there you go. So my answer to that question is, I think, in the story already, as I've said for some of the others. Any other thoughts? There's probably two things I wanted to mention. The first one I've already sort of mentioned, I'll just mention it again. It was very important to me that in this book that all 6 of the characters that go to Power of Us contribute very significantly to saving the community centre in the park. And that each of them did something very, very important. So to me, Cheryl was the glue that bound everybody together. And she was the one that had the idea for how Emily would present the argument at the end. And presumably, I mean, this is very heavily implied, she arranged for Sebastian to meet them outside the meeting before the planning meeting thing before it happened at the end. So to me, she made those clear contributions. What did Emily contribute? Well, I've already said, I think Emily arguably contributed the most with her energy. Her idea to do the survey was worth a lot of money in terms of reducing the value of the land. she also crucially won Sebastian over at the end with her arguments. Florrie did that fundraising. Without that fundraising, what would have happened? And we don't know to what extent. Here's the thing. Florrie did that fundraising event, which then drew the attention of a lot of people to this, helped draw the attention of people to what was happening in the park and how it might be saved. And maybe that influenced Sebastian. Maybe Sebastian heard about this and thought, do I want to be the big bad if so many people don't want it to be saved? And I've got an out here, I could still get some money for it. So there you go. So I think Florrie contributed a lot. Abdul contributed a lot. To me, he was key in doing the grants. What about Kyle? Well, this relates to the last point I'm going to mention in a minute, but Kyle had some friends with money, and I think, here's an interesting question. Colin was the last person at the cafe before the Cat Date cafe closed. And then he had enough money to make up the difference. Was that just a lucky coincidence? Or maybe Kyle had said, any chance, you said you were going to be going, do you want to go late? Because in case we're a bit short, you can add a bit on, and if it's a lot, I'll pay half or whatever. We don't know, because again, we're not seeing every conversation. Something's happening in the background. But anyway, I think, and regardless of that, Carl did a lot of fundraising at Long Lodge, etc. And he was involved in some other things. But we're trying to focus on what the key contributions were. So what have we done? We've done Cheryl, we've done Emily, we've done Abdul, we've done Florrie, we've done Carl. What about Dean? You see, here's the interesting one. Is Dean the person that contributed the least? Ironically, even though he was the main character, which is why, again, I say it was never my intention for him to be the main character. My intention was for him to be the point of view character, for him to have an interesting journey, a journey from loneliness to friendship. But he didn't have to actually be the main character to me. Well, I mean, I think one very strong argument for Dean's involvement is I tried to drop in at least a couple of incidences of where Dean's greater age and greater experience with nature and wildlife showed, and that he guided Emily to do something better in the report. And so I would argue that he was crucial, because maybe Emily's report, and if I would say definitely, this was kind of my intention, Emily's report without him wouldn't have been as good, and yeah, so it was important. So there you go, that was his contribution. My intention was for all six to contribute, and I feel they did, and I think if you take away any of those contributions, the whole thing kind of falls apart a bit. Which does beg the question, of course. Here's the question, because I've thought about this. If you had to pick one of them to try and save the park on their own, who would you choose? I don't know. Again, this is why I think Emily's the main character. I think you'd choose Emily. Emily is so stubborn. Before any discussion was had about in the library, before Emily was already starting to make the report, and she was clear that she was going to be going to that meeting and making a presentation. That was happening. It was just Cheryl that guided her to make the presentation before, to Sebastian in person. So, my point, do you know what? My answer to the question that I just posed is, if you had to pick one of them, you'd pick Emily, and maybe she could do it. But in reality, I don't, surely she couldn't really, because, I mean, you needed the money to pay, even if Sebastian had given it for nothing, I think there would still have been costs in renovating the community centre. There were some serious problems that needed solving, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, there you go. There's a little last thing I wanted to touch on. And I don't really want to go into it too much, but I did purposely try and just look a little bit at the issues of the wealth gap in England between the poor and the rich. Kyle is wealthy. One of the contributions he made to saving the park was financial. And notice he lived in a really nice big house. Whereas the people with less money, to me, it was purposeful, the idea that some subtle things in the story were driven by wealth inequality. And yeah. I kind of don't want to go on about it, but I just wanted to mention, for those of you watching this video, that if you noticed that and you wondered if I put it in on purpose, I did. But that wasn't really what the story was about, which is why I had this as a note to mention at the end, along with the everyone contributing. And in reality, I've realised that I don't really have much to say on it. But yeah, it was intended to be a little kind of, just a little kind of subplot or feature theme within the story. There you go. This is you're probably watching this as a video on YouTube. Maybe if for some reason my book is still being read in 10,000 years' time, and I've got this theory that language is stabilizing now, so that's theoretically possible. Maybe you're just watching this, I don't know, on however you watch things in 10,000 years' time. Maybe you don't even know what YouTube is. Anyway, if you are watching this contemporaneously-ish with my publication of it on YouTube, then there's probably a comment section. YouTube is unpredictable at best. There's probably a comment section, in which case feel free to comment, stick your own ideas in. I'm not on the internet all the time. I sometimes squirrel myself away writing and ignore the internet for possibly weeks at a time. So don't expect an instant reply. But at some point, I will try to look in on the comment section every so often and chip in. I'd love to read what you think. And that's it. Comment section, that's the big thing. If you want to jump into the comment section of YouTube at this point, and that's a way to carry on with the reading group. Thanks for listening.